thank you very much, teams and judges. Judges, you have a chance to make some final markings. I'll go ahead and collect this stuff.
Can you get rid of this one?
Oh, that's right. Round 3B. This case number 4, professional love. All right, the question as it stands. Was it morally wrong for the social worker in this case to take the child to her home for the night? Again, was it morally wrong for the social worker in this case to take the child home to her home for the night? You have 2 minutes to prepare. That's 2. You have 10 minutes to present.
Okay, cool. So of course, we're APU. The question was it morally wrong for the social worker in this case to take the child to her home for the night? Which we answered, no, it was not morally wrong for the social worker in the case to take the child to her home for the night. That is, it was morally permissible for her to do so, but not morally optimal. And we're going to point out how her decision could have been improved. So just to give you a quick background on the structure that we're going to be working with in this case. Max is going to provide us with the methodology and principles that we're going to use to address this case. Justin will jump in and give us the positive case. And after him, Austin will address potential objections. And then if time permits, I will summarize. So here's Max.
Thank you, Stefano. All right, first I'm going to start off with giving the methodology, and I'm going to move on giving the principles on which we're going to be using to develop our case. Start with methodology. You can find our methodology in traditional social contract theory. It's called public reasons liberalism. In public reasons liberalism, you have ethical principles that we use to develop our political rules that govern our common everyday life. And these ethical principles have a broad and reflective consensus. An example of a form of public reasons liberalism, just for clarification, is Rawls, where he incorporates original position, veil of ignorance, just as an example. Now, moving on to our principles. We have 2 principles on which we are going to be utilizing our methodology of this broad overlapping consensus that acknowledge and Yeah, two principles. First principle being what we're going to call the principle of human dignity. The principle of human dignity acknowledges two kinds of rights. The first being negative rights, and negative rights deals with this requirement to not bring harm onto other people. An example of this you see in Mill in his work in On Liberty. The second kind of rights within principle of human dignity is positive rights. Positive rights is a requirement to care for other people, to show some sort of care for others. Another example of this is within natural law theorists like Aquinas. So in other words, the principle of human dignity acknowledges two rights: negative rights, don't harm others; positive rights, care for others. Now our second principle that we're going to be using is the greatest happiness principle, where Mill states an act is right as it tends to promote happiness, wrong as it tends to do the opposite. There's two common interpretations of the greatest happiness principle. The first being act utilitarianism, where it's a focus on an outcome of individual actions performed under the greatest happiness principle. So a focus on outcomes of individual actions. Then there's rule utilitarianism. Rule utilitarianism focuses on the outcome most likely to occur if an action was performed as a rule. We're going to be adopting the rule utilitarianism interpretation when considering the greatest happiness principle. This concludes our methodology. We'll pass it over to Justin for the positive case.
Thank you, Max. So I'm going to give a clarification and then two positive arguments for our case. So our clarification is that while reading through the National Association of Social Workers Code of Ethics, we see that there tends to be two dividing factors. We have the duty to the taxpayers who fund the program, and that we have the right for taxpayers to use their money appropriately. And then we have the duty to the children that the social workers care for. We need to be careful that we don't impede one's rights for the others. So moving on to our first argument titled the duty to care argument. We see that social workers are in this really interesting position where their main job is to care for a young child, to be that trustworthy figure that displaced children look to for guidance. Yet they're told to separate themselves from their job. As a human, having that disconnect is very difficult, and some might even say impossible. So the social worker, in this case Maria, struggles with that when she decides to take the child home with her, weighing the other options, taking to a home that is known for violence, even if it's just over the night. That's dangerous. And being that caring and trustworthy figure, she can't consciously do that to the child. Moving on to the second argument, called the taxpayer argument. Here we see that in accordance with the taxpayer dollars, we need to appropriate facilities and sometimes foster homes, temporary placement homes for children with these extraneous situations and circumstances. But we feel, and this is where we bring in the optimal case, that it would be better to find other social workers that volunteer themselves to become temporary placement facilities. Now, this does currently go against the Code of Ethics for social workers, but we are asking that we amend that to incorporate this into it. That way we are placing these children in families that do care about the well-being of the child and are openly ready. They're not going to be overbooked or crowded with children that may have any violent tendencies that can cause harm to these children that need to be placed in stable homes. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Austin.
Thank you, Justin. Our first objection, we're going to title the scope objection, and it goes as follows. In the broad scope of things, there are at least over 400,000 kids in the foster care system. And with that being said, how would we even go about proposing being able to provide such a vast network of dependents of the state with this kind of individual care that our argument seems to kind of stipulate or propose? Well, and our reply to this is that it should only be applicable in extreme cases. When we mention like taking them home, in extreme cases, when a social worker can verify that there is a greater risk in leaving the child in an unsafe environment, and if the social worker can reasonably verify that there's a home, that her home as an interim location is more safe than another transitional form of housing, i.e. a police station where felons and violators and other violators of the law are present, or in the hospital where she may be exposed to traumatic scenes, or other public housing such as the transitional housing offered by the foster care system in lieu of a foster home where abusive children live and may potentially harm her, it seems that it would be better, in order to preserve the dignity of the child, to put her out of harm's way. As in this case, in the individual case, Maria thought so, and as we posit in our case as well. Our second objection is the extraneous emotion objection, and it appears that in our case, or our argument, or appeal at least, it appears that that we want to amend and revise the social worker code of ethics or the standard operating procedure to permit for a greater emotional attachment. And I would like to say that's not the case. We want to provide reasonable care and treatment in the revision amendment to the social worker code of ethics, and that we don't want to allow for this kind of this emotional this emotions to cloud the perception and hinder the ability to make rational decisions of the social worker. But we do want her to be invested in her decision in that providing care. If we could take out the word emotion and replace that with care, we believe that's a fundamental duty of the social worker to provide the necessary care to ensure that children within the foster care system are receiving what they need as dependents of the state, and as the professional duty, as well as the professional duty of the social worker in providing for the child the necessary care. So with that being said, I would conclude our objections portion, and I'd like to turn over to my colleague Stefano to summarize our case.
Okay. So the question was it more than wrong for the social worker in this case to take a child to her home for the night? We said that it wasn't morally wrong, but it could have been done in a better way. It was not more optimal as well. So just to give a quick recap on the points that we touched on. We talked about the duty to taxpayers, in which we need to responsibly spend taxpayer dollars in order to promote for the greatest aggregate happiness of taxpayers. And then also we talked about the duty to children, which we need to, like Max said, we need to care for the human dignity of children. Also, the greatest happiness principle comes into play in our objections, where Austin was talking about the alternatives, where the child could have stayed for the night. So when we assess the alternatives as to where the child would have spent the night if the child had not spent the night at this social worker's house, we see that, she might have been put at a police station for the night or at a hospital. At the police station, she could have been just by herself with cops kind of taking in criminals. I don't know if that's the right environment for her. And then also at a hospital, they might not have, hospitals are busy like we talked about in the previous case. Neonatal care, there are sick people with heart attacks and all kinds of things, of course. And so they might not have the necessary personnel there at the hospital in order to take care of the child. And for these reasons, we believe that it was not morally wrong for her to take the child home with her for the night. Thank you.
Team A, you have 1 minute to prepare a response.